This is an optional extra section on Russell's argument for the principle of acquaintance. I shouldn't really say this is optional, they're all optional. This is particularly optional. I recommend that you skip over it unless you're especially interested. So we know that Russell endorses the principle of acquaintance. Here it is. Every proposition which we can understand must be composed wholly of constituents with which we're acquainted. So we know what the principle is. We don't fully understand that principle yet, I think. At least most of us are very unlikely to. That's one thing. The other thing that we haven't got is any kind of sense of what Russell might say by way of defence of this principle. So what does Russell say? What's his argument for the principle? Well, one thing he says, you know this I think, already, he says, it seems to me that the truth of this principle is evident as soon as it's understood. Now when a philosopher says that, you can be pretty sure, first of all, that the principle is far from evident, it's going to be quite controversial, and secondly, that they haven't got an argument for it. The other giveaway here is the use of the word me. I strongly encourage you not to use the word me, not to refer to yourself when you're writing. Philosophy isn't really about your opinions. I'm sure you've got lots of opinions. So have I. I used to read The Guardian, and then I realised that I got enough opinions, so I switched to something else. Opinions are lovely, and that's great. That's a weekend thing. Don't spend your work time, don't spend your philosophy time doing opinions. Don't write about yourself. Nor you, Russell. Bad, Russell. Bad philosopher. Very bad. Who cares what it seems like to you? Right? You're not special, you're just Mr. Russell. Well, you are special, yes, you're tremendously special. But even so, I don't care what you think. And nor should you. This isn't really a course about what people think, it's a course about the truth. We're trying to get to the truth. So anyway, what does Russell say? Here's an attempt at an argument. Right? I think there is an argument here somewhere. He says, the theory that judgments consist of ideas is fundamentally mistaken. What does he mean by that? He goes on to say, the view, so I take it this is the theory that judgments consist of ideas, the view seems to be that there is some mental existent, which may be called the idea of something outside of the mind of the person who has the idea, and that since judgment is the mental event, its constituents must be constituents of the mind of the person judging. Okay, so here's me, I'm thinking about the puffin, and as Russell presents the theory of ideas, what has to happen here is this: there has to be me, an idea in my head of the puffin, and the puffin itself. So we get this kind of threefold thing going on here. So the thing that I'm most directly related to is just the idea of the puffin, and then there's some relation between the idea and the puffin, I suppose. Okay, good. I'm not sure you're going to sit there for long. Anyway, you're not going to sit there. Okay, good. But in this view, ideas become a veil between us and outside things. This is very profound. We never really in knowledge attain to the things we are supposed to be knowing about, but only to the ideas of those things. So this is Russell's criticism. If we think that, thinking or knowing something about the puffin is a matter of being related to an idea, then of course the idea seems to be a barrier between me and the puffin, and it's unclear what the relation between the idea and the puffin is, and therefore unclear how I'm ever going to be thinking about the puffin at all. As Russell says, the relation of mind and idea and object on this view is utterly obscure. Anyway, that's Russell's critique. Of course you might disagree with Russell, I hope you've got some good reasons if you do. So let's just pop that away. So here's the core part. What does Russell go on to say? Well, I'll tell you. I'm glad you asked. He says, I see no reason to believe that when we're acquainted with an object, the puffin, there is in us something which can be called the idea of the object. On the contrary, I hold that acquaintance is wholly a relation not demanding any such constituent of the mind as supposed by the advocate of ideas. So the relational view, the acquaintance view that Russell has, is there's two things, me and the puffin. The ideas view that he's attacking here, as he presents it, is the claim that there are three things, me, the idea of the puffin, and the puffin itself. And Russell says, since the relation between the idea of the puffin and the puffin itself is obscure, introducing those ideas is just creating problems. I'm going to get rid of those altogether. I'm just going to have direct relation between me and the puffin, the relation of acquaintance. No ideas at all. So here's the crux of it. The theory that judgment consists of ideas, says Russell, is fundamentally mistaken. Acquaintance is wholly a relation, not demanding anything like an idea. Now I think there's an attempt at an argument here for the principle of acquaintance. I'm not certain about this, but I think there might be. And I think if I were to reconstruct it, I'd say something like this. When things go well, our thoughts are about things in the world. I'm going to show you a case when things don't go well, when we're not thinking about anything at all. Of course, it's possible to, you know, fake think, as we might call it. But it's not always like that. Secondly, any theory of thought needs to elucidate the relation between thoughts and things. Seems clear enough. That's actually what we're trying to do in this course. Or at least we're exploring that idea. Invoking ideas, says Russell, to do this makes matters more, not less obscure. Now, there's a very good case for that. You may not be fully convinced here, but I think you've got to have some pretty good reasons to reject that idea, given the last sort of 400 years or so of work in philosophy. Therefore, says Russell, the intentionality of thought consists at bottom in a relation between the thinker and the object, and that relation is acquaintance. So if this is right, we've got close to an argument for the principle of acquaintance. I say close to because this conclusion that you've got here, that isn't quite the principle of acquaintance. The other thing I wanted to mention here is, I'm using this term intentionality for the first time, so I ought to highlight that. By intentionality, I just mean this idea of point of view. So the idea is that the intentionality of thought is the fact that your thoughts are a matter of you having a point of view on the world. When you're thinking about something, there's a relation between you and a thing. That's intentionality, as I understand it. Now, of course, you can get into all kinds of hot water with this term intentionality, but here I'm using it in a way just as a shorthand for talking about points of view. So I might have said, look, the fact that in virtue of having thoughts you have a point of view on certain parts of the world consists at bottom in a relation between a thinker and an object. I don't really need that term intentionality there at all. So I'm not going to introduce anything new and complicated, and nor should you. Okay, so here's what I think might be an argument that Russell gave for the principle of acquaintance, or I might be wrong. Maybe that's not what Russell had in mind at all. Maybe the argument's a good one, maybe it's not. I'm not sure. Here's the argument though. This is my attempt. Very good. Okay, so what do I want to emphasise here? Well, actually something pretty simple. It seems to me that even if I'm wrong about Russell's argument, he's saying two things that I don't think can both be true. On the one hand, he wants to say the truth of the principle of acquaintance is evident as soon as the principle is understood. But on the other hand, over here, he wants to say, I hold that acquaintance is wholly a relation, not demanding of any such constituent of the mind as is supposed by the advocates of ideas. And I take that to mean this. Either the principle of acquaintance is kind of empty because it's just compatible with the theory of ideas, or more likely, the principle of acquaintance is pretty controversial because if you accept that principle, you reject all of the views of those many philosophers who've claimed that there are ideas. So it can hardly be then that the principle of acquaintance is evident as soon as it's understood, or at least I think that's unlikely, right? That would be a breathtakingly fabulous refutation of many other philosophers. And as you study philosophy, perhaps you've already studied plenty of it enough to know, you'll realise that philosophers very, very rarely are engaged in any kind of substantive form of refutation. It's very, very unusual. I think this is probably not such a case. Therefore, my suggestion to you is that these things can't both be true. The principle can't both be an interesting philosophical device for rejecting theories about the connection between thoughts and the world, and also a principle which is evident as soon as it's understood. We have to make a choice.